Okay, so in 3ds Max, I'm gonna go to File, Import, Desktop, go to my high polys, select them all. I guess you only can do one at a time. You can drag them in. So if we go into our folder, desktop, high poly, let's just drag it in. Okay, I guess only one at a time. At least it's easier to drag it in. That's weird, it isn't, no. Okay, that was weird. So it looks like you have to deselect the object when you throw in a new object in. Otherwise, if you have it selected and throw another object in, it's actually going to replace the object you have selected. I actually did not know that. So just make sure you don't have anything selected when you throw it in. Okay. Alright, so we'll just move this aside. Here's our leaves. Now this is where I want to set all the pivot points. So to set the pivot points, I'm going to go to Effect Pivot Only. And I'm just going to move it right to the stem. Just make sure to leave this mode on so you can select on any object and just reassign the pivot points. Okay. So now the idea behind this, guys, is that I'm going to go into each one of these pieces and I'm going to start stylizing them. But before I do that, I need to create like just a basic branch. So to do that, I'm going to go to my standard geometries. I'm going to create a plane. I'm going to drag, create a plane, hold down Control so that it's uniform. So this is a perfect texture size. I'm going to make sure my segments are set to 0. So if I press F4 to activate edge faces, I'm going to set this to 0 or 1, 1, 1. So we got that. Now, what I want to do is I kind of want to create just a branch. So let's just look at the reference branch. Just so we have a good idea of how this should be stylized. So if you look closely, this is pretty much how a lot of branches are stylized, is that you'll have one main branch, and then that branch does not spawn any leaves. It's only basically the childs of that branch that would have leaves. You can see that in this example as well. So you don't have to copy. Just know you don't have to find reference and just make it exactly like that, but you need to look at the reference so that you get inspired by it. You need to know exactly how the trees branch off. If you look here, just look at the style of this. You can see how it branches off, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until it just kind of disappears into thin air. Alright, and like if you think of a tree, the idea, the way it survives is that it spreads out, so you have a lot of leaves to cover a lot of distance so it can absorb more sun and survive. So you're looking at a lot of spacing. A lot of trying to cover a lot of spacing with the leaves. Alright. And note that what we're drawing now, it's going to be a 2D texture, so it doesn't matter how many polygons you have on it. So I'm gonna go into my line tool, and I'm just gonna prototype a nice stem. I'm gonna make sure I put the stem this way, going diagonal, just so we have a bit more room. Just gonna create some points here, and I'm gonna change them around. I'm just gonna change everything to be a corner, so it's a bit more straighter. Usually when you look at these branches, you can see that it's very straight on its angles, very small curves. However, most of these directions are straight, very subtle curves though on the edges. So straight branches, but subtle curves. Alright, so I'll go into rendering, enable in viewport and renderer. And I'll just increase the size of this brush. Now I do want it to get smaller over time, so maybe we can use a modifier. Let me try taper, I think this does it. It might have to be edited poly though, let me see. Yeah. Let me convert this to an edit poly. There we go. So let me add a taper. Alright, so it's doing what it's supposed to, except it's on the wrong direction. There we go. I think that is doing it. No, not really. There we go. That's actually doing on the wrong angle. See if I can change the gizmo. Okay, so never mind about that. Taper is not working for this. We could also use this effect. So we can select vertices, go to soft selection, select the very tip. Actually, let's make this the tip. And just make sure we have a very good fallout. You want to make sure that the fallout highlights the whole branch, and you want to make sure that you have a good set of pitch, because you want the pinch to really pinch this section here, so it's very, very on a sharp angle. Now if I scale this, you can see that it changes the brush. Alright, let me give this some variation here. Okay, so now what I'll do is just I'll add some more branches. I could even make copies of this. Maybe change the scale. Remember, you usually get larger branches at the bottom. If you want to mirror stuff, you can just go right up here, click on geometry. This actually might be a really big branch. So let me just go into my edit poly. Hit Shift X so it's on constraints. Actually, that doesn't work. Let me disable mirror. Just make this branch a bit smaller. It's a bit too small. That's too long. So you could even sculpt this, just FYI. So I'll select both of these and just scale it down. Remember, as your branches get out, they become smaller and smaller. Alright guys, so just note that these branches I've created so far, these are not branches that would have leaves on them. It's only the branches of these branches. Something like this. So you could have something like this going off. I'd recommend probably another branch though, just a smaller branch. So what I'll do is I'll make a copy of this, move it down here, and have this kind of rotate. Make sure to give it as much space as possible. Remember, these branches just naturally try to get as much space. Change the scale of this. Change the scale. And then change the scale. And rotation. Change scale. Change rotation. I'll change the rotation of this as well. So basically something like that. Now what I'll do is I'll grab my leaves. And I'll just start compiling them. Let me move them over here. So I'm just going to make a copy of them so I just have a reference, just in case if we need to go back to them. So you can see these leaves are quite big. We don't want it to be this big. So I'm just going to downscale these. Probably a little bit more. Okay. Now you don't even have to do this like this effect. What I recommend is that you also want to have leaves underneath it as well, like this, because you want to create an interesting silhouette like this. So what I'll do is I'll actually move this a lot closer together, these branches. I don't want them to be intersecting at all like this. So let me actually move them to the same platform, same Z offset. Like that. Now what I'll do is I'll select this, I'll rotate it so that it's not on top of another leaf. I'll select this leaf, I'll make it lower. This leaf over here, I'll put this leaf on the side like this. So something like that. This I'll lower it like that. I can lower this a bit more. Change that as well. Just because leaves always come in different angles, so definitely try to communicate that. Except you wouldn't want to do this because your projection won't pick that up. So don't do anything that'll face directly on the camera like that. So this I can lower like that. So if I lower this, oops. In fact, I'm going to just select this plane and just move it a bit lower. Okay, sweet. What I'll do, guys, is that I'll copy these, just because this is quite a good style, and then I'll group them. Control G, or go to group, hit OK, make a copy of that, rotate it, might want to make it a bit bigger. Remember, the leaves get bigger when they get below their stem. You don't want intersection like this to happen. So what I'll do is I'll move this on the side like this. And then I'll go to open reclusive. So I can select these individual pieces, rotate them downwards. I'm just going to make these a lot smaller because you wouldn't see leaves this big over here. Changing the scale of leaves definitely makes it look a lot more interesting as well, because not all leaves are the same size. Alright, they get a bit too big. So I gotta just downscale both of these. I'm gonna select the background. I'm just gonna freeze it, just so that I don't accidentally select on it. This way I can do multiple selects like this, and scale. Let me not select that group. And just close, close, and I'll ungroup that. Change the scale. Okay. So just to quickly do this, because obviously this could take a while, you want to make it look as unique as possible, just so that your branch looks really interesting. But just because I do want to have this finished by the end of class, I'm just going to start copy and pasting this. There is also a method that we can try. So let me see if this will work. Let me move this over here. So this method revolves in creating a line. So if you create a very simple line like that, maybe with 3 points, I'll make sure that the points, let me just make sure it's visible. I'll make sure the points are all corner except the middle. I'll make sure it's smooth, so it's a smooth effect. And now what I'll do is that I'll select on one of the leaves, say this leaf. I need to make sure it's exactly on the pivot point though. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my snaps are on. It's set to vertex, and I set affect pivot only. Make sure I press S to activate snaps, and just move that right to anywhere on the stem here. Now the reason I'm going to do that is because once I do that, what I can do is I can go into our modify settings. We can click on this option here called path deform. Now I didn't try it. Actually, I've never tried this with a very high poly mesh, so hopefully it doesn't crash. Yeah, I don't think this is something we can do for all our leaves. It looks like it's taking too long. But basically, the idea of pathiform and what it does is that it allows you to get the mesh, put it into an actual spline, and then you can change the position of this, but it'll always follow, it'll always be binded to that line. So this is a good way to create chains or anything that's supposed to follow geometry. Okay, looks like I have to go to an auto backup. Oh my god. It hasn't been saved for a while, Jesus Christ. It's supposed to save every 5 minutes.
Yep. But I find even when you set it to that, it doesn't do it.
Sometimes it doesn't do it, there's nothing to explain why.
Yeah.
Damn it. Now we have to go super fast. So guys, I'm gonna go super fast. We're gonna try to do it. FYI, it's probably not gonna look pretty, but I'm gonna expect it to look pretty in your assignments. Just FYI.
We have to teach this again, right?
Sorry?
You have to teach this again?
The leaves?
Yeah.
Not really, because you guys already have the
like
idea.
other class.
Oh no, I already taught them.
So you already have this recorded?
Not in this detail though.
Oh.
Not in this detail, that's for sure.
Great.
But this is recording right now. Oh my god, I gotta do this line. Oh my god. Why?
Oh, I know.
What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure there's some subdivision to this. So I'm going to create an interesting branch. And then what I'll do, I'm going to put in a poly onto this. Now I'm going to put a turbo smooth onto it. I'm going to make sure I have some edge constraints here. Shift X so I lock it. Constrain that edge. Constrain that edge. Turn on turbo smooth. Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll put another edge here just so I have a straight line on my turbo smooth. So it looks a bit more like a branch. This looks a bit too curvy. So I can select this, go to connect, set my connect to 2, and then set this to 99. That when I enable turbo smooth, it just looks smoother, but we still have those bumps. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale of this, but I'm going to do it within turbo smooth because I want to have all these edge information. So I'm going to collapse all, put an edit poly onto it, select the very tip, very tip, enable soft selection, increase it. In fact, let me go from this edge and scale. Let me make this a bit bigger. And then here, I'll make this smaller. And then together. Okay. So we have a branch. I'm going to set the pivot point to this branch right here. Affect pivot only.
Stop. Don't ever sit.
Make a copy. Rotate. This is way too big, so obviously I'm gonna change the scale on this. An easy way. Let's see, I'm gonna just gonna, if I can select this.
Well, it depends on the studio.
Right.
Like Billy, I think does both. He's a modeler and an artist. Like the way he described it, he doesn't want stuff that he's like.
I think he's also like a design.
Yeah, he is. So he does modeling, design, and modeling. He does a bunch of shit.
I seen that.
So I think he looks at pictures.
Let me change the scale of this.
You get to be able to do everything. Not only design the model, but you design this. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna change my pivot point for this branch. Make sure it's spread out.
So he works more at the base level. He works more like the block of the wall.
Okay, but the problem is that every studio is different. A lot of them combine roles. They're not always broken down. Because he's a senior level artist, is what he is. So he
Okay.
lists himself as.
So then someone, just for example, someone who would be modeling, say for Sugar, so that's like the only game anybody plays these days. Someone modeling, let's say the gut, they're not doing the level design, right? Right. Well, which one would be? Okay, so would level design be higher than? So be the hard surface,
So I'm just offsetting this so it looks a lot more interesting. You definitely want your shape to look like a branch. Okay, so we got this. It's golden. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of these strands.
It's really difficult.
You gotta make sure you get it right the first time.
Yeah, you have no second
It's
chances.
like my project 2.5, my project 2.7. It's also like the folders too where you place like the information for the because you can't move on.
Okay,
Chances here.
let's see how quick I can do this.
But then you would go. Yeah. The kit being like.
All the modulars.
Now eventually when the branches get smaller, so the amount of branches, so you can see here I have 3. Actually here probably I should have, well this one has 4, I'll probably put here 5. Make this even smaller.
Well, what I'm saying is like, so he would be like, okay, model this like, this much, and then he would model like, then we're and then be like, it works, or doesn't work, send it back.
Let me freeze this. Let me save this because I definitely don't want this to crash again. And if it crashed, by the way, guys, if you ever work in your auto backup file, it won't make up auto backups. So you want to make sure you save right away. Let me make this a bit smaller. This needs to be smaller too.
I'm gonna ask him next time we see him, because the way he explains it sometimes, it's really confusing.
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, another thing I wanted to show you guys is that let me just get this down to size. But you can use an F50 to just kind of change the shape.
But again, it's hard, because like I said, it's gonna be different in every studio. Like if you look up, let's say,
Right, but I mean like
okay, but Googling it is in.
Let me see if I can grab this.
Oh.
Isolate it.
Why is it spiral? That doesn't make any sense.
Like, okay, environment artist.
environment.
It breaks down.
Thank God
into-
you're here, 'cause I've been watching it the whole time.
So yeah, environment art should make it pretty.
They create models of assemble scenes to both architectural and organic environments, troubleshoot levels and maintain to save frame rate, not rate, not too bad. That's apparently what environment art is.
Okay, so I'm gonna change the pivot points. Effect pivot. Make sure my pivot set to vertex.
And it's different than, like, yeah, but like overall it's different. Like, I mean, this is not supposed to be.
Well, I guess that'd be the best way to do it. Find
Jesus.
That's why.
That's what happens when you have too many vertices.
The one that's gonna tell you exactly what you need.
So my question would be, if you were going into it, and you're like, oh,
Oh my God.
you go in being like, my studio has level design, or would you go in being like, this is the end of the line, and then while you're in there, you show that you can like it.
So this is that a first job is also very long experience.
It'd be first job. Yeah.
So first job you don't go in until
Yeah.
So if you want.
yeah, it's the
You're looking at like.
So one thing you guys can do is that you can add an F50 to this.
Entry level.
I'll put an F53. And what you can do with this is that you can change the pivot points.
Like, okay, good place to look would be.
Hopefully this did not crash again.
Oh, I've seen
God damn. Alright, F50's bad idea on this.
Are you, what's your graphics set to? Is it DirectX 11?
On 3ds Max?
Yeah. Cause if you're,
On DirectX 11?
yeah, like. it
Causes
under,
problems?
What do you call it?
It's because this has an ATI card.
I know, but if.
And ATI cards are crap for everything.
I find with, like, I don't know if it's DirectX, what the hell is it called?
DirectX.
Is it? Is that what it's called?
DirectX 11?
Yeah, so if you're on 11, I find Max is just super unstable. I always switch mine to 9. Because sometimes
Oh.
it'll just, but it'll repetitively
But then
crash
you
on
can't
one.
use the newest the newest drivers they have for 3ds Max. You won't be able to handle that many polygons.
I know, but like, sometimes 11 just will not work.
But then again, see, it's because I'm also using an F50 on something that has a lot of polygons.
Okay, makes sense. See, okay,
Let's try it again on my personal computer and see if that happens. Luckily, I did save it recently.
But I guess the only thing is like the diagram of it, like the bulb is it works, but if you like break down each prop, I think that's what you should be doing. And go in and like spend like every other one
See,
street.
okay, like something like this, where you can earn to have assistant. It's like 2 years of post-secondary education in 2D and 3D. Eagerness to learn new software and tools, ability to work in a
Yes.
team. 1 to 2 years game experience preferred but not essential. And you do like
Just snap
general
this
art
on.
support for the main environment, change processing artwork through game design, optimizing artwork, creating support assets, troubleshooting, and bug fixing. That's a really good example of something we can be applying to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have all the necessary skills.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're in Oakville, which is like 2 minutes from my house.
Rockstar's in Oakville?
Rockstar Toronto, yeah, is actually in Oakville. Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah.
What I guess they were just helping the pipeline for like GTA. Cause I don't think anything independent's come out of Rockstar Toronto.
They do.
So you definitely want the silhouette to look interesting.
They have a lot of mini ones.
Mini ones?
Yeah, like they're not like huge flagships.
So what I'm gonna do is just change the sizes of these.
DLC products or
Oh, they did like fully.
what is it?
I know, but it just means like they don't do GTA.
No, yeah, but like
Or they'll do like the little GTA things or support for them.
mhm.
Like they did, that's 5. 7? No, that's 5. That's 4.
Should have been like arguing
Scale.
the other day about at some point you're gonna have to decide in the industry if you want to make a living or you want to remain like true. You wanna stay on the side of like I'm a fan for video games and I want to like go with it and go to
You almost have to go to the industry either A, wanting to make a difference, or B, probably because you don't. You really can't get both done.
But if you're going about the money, you can't have more.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what I mean. Like you're either going in because you want to make a difference and because you enjoy the studio, or you go in and you want the money, you like pretty much go to a firm and do whatever you need to do. So I like the ideas. Oh.
I like the idea of indie, but at the same time it's like
It's not sustainable.
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
as secure position as it is.
Unless you're like one of those small companies that makes one game and somehow makes it big.
Yeah, it kills them.
Yeah.
Well, even when that happens, there's still like shit that can
Oh, absolutely.
like it Dead Space. It was made by like Visual Games and then EA bought them and then EA's like we're on this
Yeah.
and like we don't like it, we're shutting it down. Yeah, like it was November last year. They were working on a Han Solo
Jason?
yeah.
Oh my God.
I think Naughty Dog but Han Solo. Which sounds awesome. But then EA pushed their development aside so they could work on Battlefront 2. And then they said there's no place in the industry for legendary games. But they were cool. Like one of the finest games.
Let me just change my wireframe to black and just give everything a very simple gray tone.
I don't know if it's like just what I've seen. It feels like these as their internship is more like projects than positions.
Just from what I've heard.
The problem is it's like the closest thing. Right, that's to be honest, that's the most place you can go. And that's not just in this industry,
Oh my god, are you kidding me?
I don't think you're
Yeah, probably not. And still no auto backup even though I saved it.
You are lucky.
If look can work at it, now you go to Rare. And Rare does internships.
Yeah.
And we're in the UK, which is awesome.
But I feel like Rare's even another one that's like iffy.
Iffy, yeah.
They went like on a good 10-year run of
It's hard because yeah, they like made it big with like Conquers
yeah, with Banjo and
and
Conquer.
Banjo.
And then
Then they kinda had a lull.
they had a lull for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And they
So,
lost a
like-
lot of their stuff.
But like when I look at like Rare and Disney's like they do look good.
They're very true
To
to what they
themselves.
make. And
Yeah.
they're like, we're really good at doing platformers, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Like
Well, I
they're-
mean, CFCH is open, but which is new for them.
But they made that in like 1993. That was the original like design for Banjo Kazooie.
Yeah.
And then they're like, it's not working, let's make it.
Yeah, that's true.
And then yeah, they finally came back to it. Hopefully it works. Rare is also owned by Microsoft now too.
Yeah, so like for them, well, like to apply for their internships, all you have to do is
Or Rare.
graduate from any area.
But even like look at the level of professional, like the difference between Ubisoft and Rare. Like Rare is very stylized and Ubisoft is like
Yeah.
honestly you could do your like 3 years experience in Ubisoft. That's like the minimum for most jobs.
Yeah.
And then
No, we don't really do sweet though.
the one thing I really found about Ubisoft is they treat their employees like
Yeah, they're full contract.
yeah.
Yeah.
But they still offer them like stocks in the company all the time.
Yeah, I have that talent, so they're not special.
No, they're not, but it's different.
Yeah.
I guess it's a gimmick, but it's a nice one.
Okay. So just pretend that this thing crashed 3 times and this is all done. We're just going to start the baking process. But before that, we're going to just throw our basic material into this. So to the branches, what I'm going to do, this is a great tip, is that you can attach everything. Attach all the branches, not the leaves though.
And that position's for Steven. That like, is that Tice? Is that Junior?
Okay. I'm gonna name it branch. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to material. I'm gonna select on a brand new material. I'll name it branch. I'll go to maps, diffuse color, and I'm gonna put in a gradient. So this gradient, if I throw it onto my model, see ya.
Like SODs and all that.
I'm gonna change the color. Let me change this to more of a brown color.
Like half the stuff we're learning is like obsolete by the time we leave.
Yeah,
Gonna make sure I have shaded on.
that's very true.
Even Eric, we're playing Overwatch one night last night. There's like a leak where people were reviewing like, oh yeah, PBR is gonna be the next big thing. And meanwhile they're doing everything on like Photoshop. And the next, like a week later, they turned around and came back to school and it was like, okay, we're gonna use this stuff in
I'm gonna click on radial. And now I just want to give like this some basic UVs so that I can see this effect. So what we could do is that we can throw on something called UV-W map. And we can kind of play around with this. We can change it from planar to cylinder. You can see, change it to cylinder gives us this quite nice highlight. Sphere, shrink wrap. Let me actually change this with the gizmo. So with the gizmo, what you can do is that you can rotate this. Let me actually click on fit. So if you click on fit, you can get your gizmo to automatically fit your shape. Let me see if we can play around with this. Let me change this to a darker color. Swap. And this will be a whiter color. Let me make this a bit darker. So just play around with your UV-W map tool. You can project something on pretty cool, just so you can have some gradient. I'm going to do the same thing, the same effect for the leaves. So for the leaves, I'm going to create a new material. Go to new material, maps, gradient. I'm going to use a dark green. And now I'm going to use a mid-tone green. Make sure it's quite saturated. And now I'm going to use a highlight color, so something closer to yellow, a yellowish green. Now I'm going to make sure it's set to radial. And I'm going to throw this onto my leaf here. Make sure it's set to shaded. Oh, send it to the background. Let me hide selected. Throw it on here. Alright, so now I'm going to use the same modifier. And just play around with it, see if we can get some cool results. So what I can do is let me try to use cylinder and just play around with the gizmo tool here. Let me try sphere. Sphere is also pretty interesting. I can offset it, and I can give my leaves kind of like a highlight. Let me try to swap this color with something lighter. Okay. So the layer details we can put we can put this, basically the detail in afterwards. What we can do is that we can use a normal map, create a curvature map off this, and then bake in details. But for now, what we're going to do is that we're going to start baking this in. Let me actually go into my material and play around with this. I don't want it to be too light. Let me make this darker, more saturated. And I want to make sure I'll make my stem here light, maybe more yellowish.
That's why I think like if we're looking for project, we would give each other a drawing to show it.
Yeah. So if you're working towards something as opposed to just bringing one along.
Yeah.
Let me play around with the gizmo tool again. You can scale your gizmo as well and move it around. Rotate this.
Yeah, I was gonna say that looks
I remember this one. I see this after this chair.
Just gonna desaturate it because it looks too cartoony. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Alright, so now this material I can throw onto the rest of the leaves. And if it doesn't show up, I could just use the same UVW unwrap. If I copy it, I can paste it.
We can also let that thing
Let me just make sure I paste it one at a time because I don't want it to instance. Gotta change my gizmo location. Okay. So now anytime I make copies of these, I'll automatically have that map. So remember guys, to really make this look super realistic, what you need to do is you need to change the locations of these. Change the heights. Just because doing this, guys, it takes a bit of time, but once you have a good set, once you have everything nicely rotated, it looks a lot more realistic because the way leaves just fall on top of each other, they try to spread out. So their goal as leaves is try to get as much energy as possible to be exposed. So you're looking at leaves trying to just gather as much space as possible. But of course, sometimes they're underneath each other like that. And also, to make it look a bit more interesting, definitely crisscross some of them. Because obviously wind pushes them. You can't control exactly how they're going to stack up to each other. So just make it look a bit more interesting. Don't have them all pushed into one direction. Have them do something like this. It looks a lot more realistic. The reason that I'm not doing this now just because it does take a lot of time, and we know that I did this 3 times and it already crashed. So I'm just going to do it for this wing and we're going to bake it out. I'll lower that. Make sure it's not protruding out. Okay. Alright, so imagine I did this for the rest of our whole tree. This is all completed. What you'd want to do is unhide all. You want to bake this onto this plane. So what we need to do is that first I'm going to hide whatever we're not going to be baking. So this stuff right here, we're not going to be baking, so hide it so it doesn't show up on our pick. Now if I select on my plane here, now whenever you create a plane in 3ds Max, it's automatically already unwrapped for you. So you can even confirm this by throwing up or throwing a UVW up and looking at your Open UV editor. So you can see this is already perfectly unwrapped for you. So as long as you made this plane uniform, you don't have to worry about this. It's already good. Okay, so now with that, what we need to do is that we need to bake this onto this. So I'm going to press 0 to go to render to texture. I'm going to go to pick. So click enable, go to pick. Enable, pick. We want to pick everything that's currently visible because we hide all the stuff that we're not going to be baking. Click on add. FYI guys, if you're picking a lot of objects, like say 100, 1,000, it might take a while to add it all. Now I'm going to increase the padding to something like, let's say 12. Going to make sure my use existing channel is set to 1. Output. Now my output, I want to make sure I create a diffuse map because I want the color information. And 2, I want to make sure we create a normals map. Later on, we'll also create an ambient occlusion map using the lighting channel. All right, so I'm going to set this to, let's say, 1024 by 1024. All right, so this is pretty much perfect the way it is. For your diffuse map, you don't have to click on shadows. You don't have to click on this information. You might click on lighting, just a little bit of lighting. But if you have static lighting on your level, I wouldn't recommend it. All right, so let me click on render. Before I do that though, I need to make sure that my cage is checking absolutely everything. So I'm gonna move this a bit lower. And now I'm gonna go to my cage, I'm gonna scroll down. I'm gonna click on reset. And now I'm gonna click on push. I wanna push this so that it's above of my branch here. You can even click on shaded, and this can be more of a helpful tune. You can push it out and you can see exactly when it passes it. You always want to make sure that this is fully covering your object. Now don't just do this because doing this means that the rays are not going to be close enough and you're not going to get a sharp image. So be as close as possible while still giving it enough room to scan. Alright, so this is an easy way to tell. You can see this is way too close. There we go. Much better. So even the leaves, you want to make sure that they're inside this. Okay, now let me click on render. Just FYI, what you're seeing here is not actually your texture. Okay, so let's see how this looks like. Open, open. Sorry, it's taking a while to load. Okay, so you can see that the padding really did stretch it out a bit. Now, if you go to alpha, you can see it also baked out the alpha for that. Now, just note that the padding also affected the alpha, which is a problem. But just note that this is easily correctable. If you go into this right here, you can click on alpha, and this is what you want. You can click on copy. Control V. And this could be your alpha. So imagine if I did this completely correctly. I had all the leaves corrected. All the leaves are looking super nice. This is how it'll look like. It'll look pretty flawless. And because we have padding underneath this layer, see ya. Because we have padding, you can see that it crops it fairly well. We don't get any bleeding. And we put our alpha right into the alpha slot. So let me just quickly show you guys how that would work in Unreal. So I'm going to save out this map. Now, because I do have an alpha inside of this map, when I save it, it's absolutely important that when you save it as a target map, that you save it as a 32-bit. Each channel RGB, they're separate channels. Each channel is 8 bits. Combining them together is 24 bits. But if you want your alpha, you need the additional channel. So I'm going to name this branch diffuse plus A. So I'm just putting plus A so that I know there's an alpha included. You want to make sure absolutely you have it set to 32 bits. Remember, 24 bits is just RGB. You want the 4th channel, which is 32. Okay, let's take a look at our normal map as well. So our normal map is fairly strong. Believe it or not, I don't think the padding actually worked that well for it. Actually, it did. Never mind. It's just that there's a lot of padding, so the padding kind of pushed into each other. But the cool thing about this is that as we change the elevation of this, what happened is that you change the normals, so the normals get actually quite better. Now let's load this in Unreal and see how everything looks like. We didn't have time to put this on a plane and just spread it across our tree. But realistically, the way you would do that, and let me just show you quickly, is that you'll get that plane we created. So we'll get the same plane, we make a copy of it. Press M to open up material. Brand new material, go to texture. We go to diffuse color, bitmap. I'm gonna click on my diffuse map here. Click open. Throw it onto this. Click on go to parent. Click on shaded. Now to use the alpha, it's a bit tricky in this mode. And the reason why it's tricky is because I have it integrated into an alpha channel. Realistically, if you wanted to use it in 3ds Max, I would just recommend using it as a whole map so that you can just throw it in here and it'll work right away. There is a way to make it work the way we have it. So if we go to bitmap, select the exact same map. So the exact same map, or the one we made, the alpha. Open that up. Now you want to change this to alpha, and that will use the alpha instead. So by changing this, it won't use the RGB, it'll use the alphas. And that way we have our alpha. Alright, so the way this would work, guys, is that you could cut this out. Realistically, the way it is now, it's completely fine to leave it the way it is now. You could cut it if you'd want to, but realistically, try to save your vertex counts, because right now there's only 4. This is only 2 triangles. So now with this, what I can do is I'm going to take the pivot points, and I'm going to align the pivot points right to the stem here. And now while it's aligned to the stem, if unhide all, I can see my tree right here. So let me just grab this, make it a lot smaller. Isolate this both. Alright, so now what you want to do is that you would put it pretty much on these branches here. Now a cool way to do this without consistently moving it around and rotating it is you can go to Object Paint, click on Paint Objects, activate it, paint with selected objects, So with this active, you can see how you can draw and paint. Now you need to change the scale, otherwise it literally makes it massive. So to change the scale, you'd go right here. So let me change this to something like 5. There we go, so it's smaller. Still too big, so let me change that to probably like 2 or 3. Change this to 2. Alright, a little bit bigger. I'll set it to 4. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll click. I'm just spawning them, guys. I don't really care about the position. I can rotate them later on. You could also set like a random rotation here, but that'll take a little bit longer to figure out and it won't be perfect. But just so I have the placement correct, remember I changed the pivot point, so all I would have to do is kind of just rotate them out and spread them out. So now I'd select them, press E, and just rotate them. You might have to reposition some of them, but otherwise the placement of paint mode does help you, because all I have to do now is just rotate them, kind of just spread them out. So you always want to make sure it's also in all directions. Right now this is looking good from this side. I mean, it'll look obviously a lot better if I had a lot more leaves, of course. But from the side here, you want to make sure it's also like the leaves are going this way, because you don't want your tree to look full this way, but on the side it looks flat. So you want to make sure your branches also pop out outwards like that. Remember, the tree is always trying to spread out, trying to grab as much space as possible. You also want to change the scale of some of these depending on where they're located. For example, you want the bigger ones at the bottom, but at the top you want obviously this to be smaller. So you also want to change the scale of them. Okay, so I'll spend about a minute longer doing this and then we'll quickly export it out. Okay, so realistically, if this was completed, what I would do now is I would attach it. So I'll put the netted poly onto this base mesh, and I'll start attaching it. I could just go here to the attach tool and just select everything here. All right, now the thing I want to make sure here, guys, is that the IDs are properly set. I don't want to have multiple IDs here. So I'm going to set everything to ID 1. So it's going to screw up the cards. You can see that. But now what I do, I can just select this branch here, do Control I to invert selection, and then set it to ID 2. This is just to make sure that it's not like on ID 3, ID 4, etc. Only 2 IDs. Perfect. So now make sure your pivot point is set somewhere on the base, leveled, set as to 0, 0, 0. Make sure you reset the X forms just because you want to make sure that this looks perfect. You want to make sure everything looks proper. Now I don't even think this is at size, to be honest. Definitely doesn't look at size. So let me just make sure it's the character height, or at least twice as big. So character height is 180. Yep, super tiny tree. So let me increase that size. Okay. So when I did that, guys, you need to reset X forms again anytime you change sizes with scale. Okay, now I can export that out. Export selected, desktop. I'll save it as tree branches. Hit save. Now you want to make sure you have smoothing groups on. Everything else is kind of not important. You can export the media as well. I wouldn't recommend it just because we'll do it manually. For units, you just want to make sure this is set to 1.0 and then you're good. And you can press OK. Okay. All right, let me make this on a separate